Hi everybody, this is Miss Corey. Today we are going to be doing U12-L2, Basics of the Scientific Revolution and Enlightenment. Alright, so learning targets. Students can identify the major intellectual and scientific developments of the 17th and 18th century in Europe and describe the regional and global influences on European scientific revolution and enlightenment, and assess their impact on global society. Your job, you're going to watch this ed puzzle, you're going to answer the questions. Questions I ask you during the video today will be in blue text, as always. Follow along with your study guide. Any important concepts on the study guide will be in red text. If you have any questions, email me or come to office hours. So, my question for you is, when you hear names like Galileo Galilei, Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, Nicolaus Copernicus, what comes to your mind? So there might be a lot of things, but probably something sciencey probably comes to your mind. And we're going to learn all about them today. Yay. So what is the scientific revolution? Um, so all these men that we just talked about like 5 seconds ago, they're all part of the scientific revolution. And what it is where scholars would challenge traditional ways of thinking of the natural world. Now, today we might not think of that as like such an extreme thing to do, but you got to remember back in like the 15 and 1600s, the Catholic Church like had insane influence over all of Europe. So the scientific revolution would actually challenge and use scientific method to prove or disprove teachings of the church. One of the big one is having Earth in the center of the solar system. And the scientific revolution was between approximately the early 1500s to the late 1600s. So it started during the Renaissance. And that is where a lot of people traveled to places like Africa, Asia, and the Americas. And because of this, there was a spreading of ideas, and this led to changes of ideas among lots of different cultures. For example, Arabic numerals. So the numerals that we use today, like 1, 2, 3, 4 through like, infinity. So those actually came from the Middle East and North Africa. It's really interesting to look at the Roman numerals around the world, like pre-modern times. So you can see that here are the Arabic numerals in the West. So we've got 9 through 0 here. And then you can compare how different cultures had wrote the symbol for that number differently or similarly to the ones that we see today. And one of the big things about the Arabic numerals, beforehand there was Roman numerals that like Western Europeans would use, but they're pretty awful at adding and subtracting with Roman numerals just because there are so many characters. That's why Arabic numerals were adopted into Western European countries. Um, Other things like surgical tools like syringes, forceps, and surgical hooks came from the Arabs as well. The mechanical clock design came from China, and was powered by flowing water or liquid mercury. And there's a lot more examples, but those are just a few that I picked out. All right, so first thing first, we're going to talk about Nicolaus Copernicus. So he was alive from 1473 to 1543. He was actually a Polish priest. So he studied the ancient Greeks, and that's where the ancient Greek astronomers thought that the sun was in the center of the solar system, which today we know is correct. But during the rise of Christianity and throughout Christianity, until Copernicus, it was believed that the Earth was the center of the solar system. So you can see here is what we know as the solar system today with the sun, the Earth, and Mars. And then, but back in between the Middle Ages into the early Renaissance, the Catholic Church taught that the Earth was in the center, the sun revolved around that, and then Mars did this little loop-de-loop thing around the Earth. So Copernicus studied planetary movements for 25 years, and he concluded that the stars and planets did indeed revolve around the sun. So being a priest, he knew that these ideas were like super against the Catholic Church. So he actually hid them for many, many years. He didn't publish his studies until the last year of his life in 1543, just so he wouldn't get in trouble with the church because he was a priest. I mean, like, can't really get in trouble with your boss. Today we know his theory as heliocentric. So helio means sun, and centric means center. So the sun is the center of the solar system. All right, Johannes Kepler. So he was from 1571 to 1630. He was an assistant under his teacher, and both of them together did math calculations on planetary motion. Unfortunately, his teacher, who was Tycho Brahe, died in 1601. So Kepler kind of just took over the lead of the researching, and he concluded with the math equation for planetary motion, which you can see down here in this corner. And this math equation for planetary motion actually supported the idea of heliocentric theory. And he also discovered that planets move in elliptical orbits, not perfect circles. All right, so Galileo Galilei. So he was from 1564 to 1642. He was also an astronomer. He built his own telescope using glass lenses. And he wrote a book called The Starry Messenger, which is all about his studies in astronomy. In that book, he announced that Jupiter has 4 moons, which now today we know that there's more than just 4. Also, that the sun had dark spots and the moon had a very rough, uneven surface. And like today, we were like, well, yeah, duh, the moon has a rough and uneven surface. But before then, back in like the ancient Greeks, all the way up to Galileo, people in Europe just believed that other planets and our moon were smooth, such as ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle believed. And all these observations led him to also support heliocentrism. Heliocentrism. There we go. I got it. All right, Galileo Galilei. So church, they were super mad at Galileo, because they totally shunned the idea of heliocentrism. And here comes Galileo saying, "Oh yeah, it's real." And Galileo was really devastated because he was a very devout Catholic, and he's like, "But my scientific studies showed that heliocentrism is true, but the church won't accept it." Like he was totally split on the topic. So what actually happened to him is he went on trial in front of the Pope. Here's a painting depicting that with the Pope right here in red. And he was forced to read a confession that heliocentrism was incorrect. Um, he felt really defeated, but again, he was not wrong. And Galileo went under house arrest for the rest of his life until he died in 1642. It wasn't until 1992 that the Catholic Church actually recognized or acknowledged that Galileo was right all along. All right, Isaac Newton, 1643 to 1727. So he studied math and physics at Cambridge University. Newton believed all objects were affected equally by some sort of force. Um, he also believed that this kind of like force also caused the motions of the planets. And this force led him to discover the law of universal gravitation, or what today we just call gravity. Um, and every object in the universe, he said, attracts other objects, and the degree of attraction depends on the mass and distance. So I'm sure you're thinking back to your like days in like ninth grade science when you had to like calculate some of those like Newton's first laws stuff. Yeah, this is the guy. He also had his famous first, second, and third law. If you've ever done some sort of physics and science, I am 100% sure you have talked about these laws. Um, so now we're going to talk about the Enlightenment movement. So Enlightenment, it was between the late 1600s to early 1800s. And when you think of that, you're like 1800s, wait, the US was a country in like, starting in 1776. Yeah, you're right. The Enlightenment movement, the Americas were a part of it. So scholars during this time were rethinking the old beliefs and brought new insight into religion, economics, education, and government. So it was an intellectual movement that stressed reason and thought. So instead of just blindly believing in the churches and their government rulers, um, scholars really push for people to think on their own and how things work. There were two main thinkers of Enlightenment. That would be Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. So Hobbes, he fought in the English Civil War, which was between 1642 and 1651. During that, he kind of went into a dark place, I guess, and he concluded that humans were naturally wicked and selfish. And so, in order to combat this, humans gave up the rights to the strong ruler. Okay, so to get rid of wickedness and selfishness, he thought humanity as a whole gave up their rights as humans to a strong ruler. In return, that ruler would give humanity law and order in return. Um, he also believed that the best government was something called an absolute monarchy. You're probably going to hear that word absolute monarchy in your other videos that you're going to watch about the French Revolution. And that is when a king or queen rules all aspects of the government and has unlimited power. Like right here, this is King Louis XIV. Yeah, it'll come up in the videos later on. All right, John Locke. So he believed people could learn from experience and improve themselves. So he's pretty much the opposite of Hobbes. He believed that humans had natural ability to self-govern and create welfare in society. So he had a definitely more optimistic outlook. He also believed all people were born free and equal. He also believed people have three rights: the right to life, liberty, and property. And the purpose of the government was to protect these three rights. And he definitely criticized Hobbes' depressing views of humanity. So wait a moment. Life, liberty, and property? Where have I heard this before? Or something similar to it? Yes, that's right. The Declaration of Independence of the United States. Yeah, you're like, oh my gosh, yes. US history, don't you remember? Um, so it says here in the line that among um, there are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Bam. So instead of property, it says pursuit of happiness. But Thomas Jefferson or whoever the heck wrote the Declaration of Independence um, totally took that from Locke. All right, so philosophists. So what philosophists are actually, they're people, and it just means it's just the French word for philosophers. And a philosopher is a person who studies ethics and logic. So a bunch of philosophists, sorry, met in Paris in the mid 1700s, and they all agreed that people could apply reason to all aspects of life. Just how scientists follow theories and mathematical formulas. They also set up these five like main concepts of reasoning in philosophy. And these five concepts of reasoning include the first one being reason itself. Okay, so they believe that the truth, and the truth can be anything. It could be scientific, it could be more like generalized knowledge, it could be discovered through reason or logic. I tried to look for an example for that one, I just couldn't find a good one. Nature was the second, and what was natural was also good and reasonable. So pretty much believes that humans were naturally good as long as they did what was pretty much natural to them. Happiness, that's where people should find joy on earth and not just focus on joy in the afterlife. That was kind of like a slap in the face to the Catholic Church, because they're always like, oh, if you pray enough then you'll have salvation in heaven, and they're like, no, have fun on earth. Progress, so that's society and mankind can improve itself. And liberty, there's a bunch of different liberties that they listed out, and some of them include things that are very similar that you should know from like US history, including freedom of speech, freedom of interference with the law, freedom of cruel and unusual punishment, and excessive bail. Yep. All right, next we're going to talk about Voltaire. So that was actually his pen name. His real name is Francois Marie Araille. I don't know. I don't know French. So he was also a French philosopher. So he published more than 70 books and essays. He fought for a lot of rights of religious belief and freedom of speech. The Catholic Church really hated him. He was actually sent to prison twice and exiled to England, which is a slap in the face because France and England are like arch enemies at this point. And he has a really famous quote, which he said, "I do not agree with a word you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." All right, next is Baron de Montesquieu, another French guy. He was a French writer. He wrote a book called On the Spirit of Laws. He said that there must be a separation of powers in the government. He did not want one single person to have too much power. And his ideas would all actually go on to be known as check and balances, which we have today in the US government. Then Jean Jacques Rousseau, another French guy. So during this time, when philosophers believed people could improve life through reason, science, and art, Rousseau actually disagreed. He believed that there was only he believed that only direct democracy government could give people the ultimate freedom under a government. And what direct democracy is when citizens vote directly on reforms and laws. So instead of having like the representative as the middleman, just the people vote for laws. So Rousseau beliefs would inspire the French Revolution, actually, that happened between 1789 and 1799. And then Mary Wollstonecraft. So she wrote an essay called A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. It was actually a response to an essay that Rousseau wrote saying that women should not be educated like men. And in it, she argues that women should have education as equally as men. And she also encouraged lots of women to go into medical and political fields. And fun fact, her daughter is the one who wrote Frankenstein, which I find interesting. All right, so we talked about some slightly more happy stuff, but there is also a very dark side to Enlightenment. And this is really going to shine in our next unit, which is about imperialism. So, but before we get to that, let's talk about Charles Darwin. I'm sure you talked about him in biology, but he was a super famous explorer who explored many biomes with plants and animals, such as the Galapagos Islands, which is his famous one. But here's a map of everywhere he went. And the voyage was from 1831 to 1835. One of his most famous things that he noted in his book was the concept of survival of the fittest. Now, in biology terms, survival of the fittest refers to organisms who are best adjusted to their environment, are the most successful in surviving and reproducing. I'm sure you talked about that in biology. So, like for example, like the bearded dragon, right? So it lives in hot deserts. It survived all this time because it has scales to lock in water. It produces body heat by bathing in the sun, or you can have like emperor penguins. There'd be an example of survival of the fittest because they have like, like layers of fat and those like super like cool feathers that like interlock, so they can survive the really harsh winter climates. Now, some really power hungry Europeans chose to interpret survival of the fittest in a very wrong and different way. So, this is something called social Darwinism. And it is the false idea that certain people became powerful in society because they were simply born better. Today, we know that is not true, but it really is the basis for what our next unit is going to be. And I know you're thinking, like, next unit, this is the first assignment in this unit. I know. I always like looking ahead. So, what is social Darwinism? So again, like I said, the false idea that certain people become powerful in society because they're born better. So if someone said, "My daddy is richer than yours," well, that must mean I'm better than you. That literally would be like social Darwinism. And if in 1800s Europeans said, "You people are still using outdated tools and have a non-European style of government," well, I use iron and I have guns, so I'm better than you. So I'm going to conquer, colonize, enslave, and massacre you. It's literally what happened. European countries. We'll get to it, don't worry. So this would lead to a lot of pseudoscience that analyze social Darwinism regarding race and religion. And what pseudoscience is, I think I mentioned this before, but it's like statements, beliefs, or practices that claim to be both scientific and factual, but that's just a boat of lies. They're actually not proven with the scientific method at all. So this would end up leading to a false sense of need to conquer for Europeans, non-white, non-European nations, which would then lead to imperialism, which is all about next unit, colonization, racism, slavery, and/or discrimination, and that would also lead to massacres and/or genocides. So once the colonizers leave too out of imperialism, and we'll talk about this more next unit, usually it ends up that that country would have little to no resources and or a dysfunctioning government. So it's really this giant snowball effect of how it really ruined a lot of people's lives in a lot of countries. Oh, but we'll get to that. That's not until another 2 weeks. All right, here's a wrap up. Today we talked about all these great things. I'm not going to list them. You already heard me talk about them. All right, so next up, this is the one and only Ed puzzle, this unit that I will actually be speaking in. So yay, good for you. Next up, you're going to do U12-L3, which is Scientific Revolution document. It's a bigger assignment, so I made it worth 10 points. After that, you're going to do U12-L4, French Revolution, and the Napoleonic Wars video sheet. That's a bigger-ish assignment, so I made that one 8 points. Yeah, on that one, the speaker, he's from Ireland, and he kind of has a thick accent, so I tell you to slow down the video just a little tiny bit, just so you can understand him a little better, because he does talk really fast. And then also U12-L5, you're going to start the Haitian Revolution Part 1. And then in the next week, you're going to do U12-L6, which is the Haitian Revolution Part 2. U12-L7, which is Revolution Video Choice. And then after that is kind of like the optional Kahoot, and then the Unit 12 test. And that's all that we're doing this unit. I did leave April 18th blank because I know at least the Elk River High School students are taking the ACT. I'm assuming RHS and ZHS are too, but not, I don't know. No one tells me things. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you certainly want to learn more, you can certainly email me or come to office hours Thursday and Friday, 12 to 1. All right, that's all. Bye.